were you already thinking about your next company at that point, towards the end of GharPay?
Yeah. So while we were running GharPay, I had gotten an insight into the payments business, and I knew that my personality, Arpit's personality, it would work really well for a software business which was more intellectual, where we didn't have to deal with a lot of people. And so we had some ideas for it, and we knew that it was exciting enough that our existing investors would support it, and we could take the money that we made from the sale of GharPay to actually invest in that business and run that. So that's basically what we did.
Sure.
We took that cash and we raised a little bit more money from the same investors to go after a digital product in the payment space instead of something that's offline.
Yeah. And that company was called Clink.
Yes, that was called Clink now.
Yeah, Clink now. I mean, you had struggled, right, with this first company, even though it did grow quite quickly and was profitable. How are you feeling going into Clink now? Were you feeling pretty confident that I'm gonna make up for all these mistakes that I made with my first startup and everything's gonna go great, and this is the next step of my entrepreneurial journey? Or was it more of a sort of, we didn't have a super massive exit, and so I need to build something else to continue my entrepreneurial journey? It was more of an act of desperation. Where were you at? What was your headspace at that point in time?
So whenever I've done a startup, it's never been for an exit. It's always been to run a company for a very long time, and something that should be fun for everybody inside it, and it should, be successful monetarily. So my idea with Clink now was to run a software company which didn't have too many employees and something that was a high margin business. GharPay was not a high margin business. It was profitable, but the margins were still low. It was a struggle to turn a profit. And I knew software were high margins because you could sell infinite copies of that same product and it's not going to cost you anything. So that was the idea. I wouldn't say it was an act of desperation because, I was so confident that it's going to work. That's the only reason you would start, right? Because for a fact it's going to work. So I had that confidence going in that it's going to work, and we did have a unique product that did make sense for our clients. I think the mistake that we made there was we were selling to banks, and
basically making software for banks for their financial collecting money from.
Oh, let me explain that actually.
Yeah.
So Clink now was in the business of providing coupons and offers to debit card and credit card customers. So while I was running GharPay, I began to see that the future definitely was in the digital space, in the digital money space, and I should go do something in that space. So we started exploring a bunch of different ideas. The first idea that we actually explored was building a peer-to-peer payment product using IMPS. So our product back then, it was called Zap, which was actually the first ever peer-to-peer payments product in India.
Wow.
But it was built on top of IMPS, which did not have any APIs. So it was a very difficult product to build because we were using SMS to identify what's going on. So it was a slightly hacky product, and we just couldn't find enough support from banks to adopt this. But that's the period when I ended up meeting all the folks who now run UPI. So some of the folks who run UPI, like the CEO of NPCI, he was somebody that we knew. We used to meet him so often. The other people who are very important and critical in the NPCI space, they were all part of IMPS. And we all used to meet up to figure out how do we get this thing off the ground, because banks don't seem to want to adopt this. And at some point in time, I realized I can't wait for this peer-to-peer thing to happen. So I started selling a different software, which was aimed at credit card and debit card users of that bank.
I just want to go back though for Zap. That, if you had stuck, do you sometimes wish that you had just stuck with it a little bit longer? Because I feel like now, if you had been one of essentially you would have had the early mover advantage in that case, right? You would have been the first before Paytm, before like anybody else was doing peer-to-peer payments. Do you look back on that and think, what if?
Not really for that one, because it if you look at UPI today, it's only very large companies who've succeeded. It's like Paytm, Google, and you have Flipkart, PhonePe. It's also a business that does not make much money at all. So it would have made sense for us if we could have been the first, but nobody else has had access to those APIs.
Right.
If everybody has access to those APIs, then it becomes a game of who has more money and who's gonna do that. So that's something that I honestly don't feel terrible about because it just would not have made sense as a business.
Sure. The cards were kind of stacked against you.
Yeah.
So you pivoted it towards banks. And what was the response? Were they thrilled that someone was solving this problem for them?
So one bank was very thrilled, RBL, Ratnakar Bank, still very grateful to them that they took a bet on a new startup to work on this. So they were really grateful, and we were able to drive a lot of transactions for them. We also started doing a pilot with HDFC Bank, which back then as well as today I think is the biggest consumer bank in India. The problem was the pilot never converted into a real thing, because the person who was running the pilot changed jobs. It was that simple. That person changed jobs, moved to a different role in the bank, and there was nobody who was there to support the pilot anymore. And we were hoping for that pilot to go through, because if that pilot had gone through, we would have been one of the biggest software companies in India, because that deal was like really, really big, like millions of dollars. And so we went from thinking we are about to make a few $1 million a year from a single bank to realizing, oh shit, this pilot is not going to go through. They're canceling the contract. And that immediately put us in a panic situation. And because we were nearly out of money, and within 2 months of that contract being cancelled, we were out of money and I was in personal debt. So that put us into sort of like that panic zone, and I realized the way out of that zone was to actually get acquired by a company which does have relationships with HDFC, other banks, so that we could at least go rescue that deal by being part of this other company. So that's when we got acquired by EasyTap.
Yeah.
And so EasyTap acquired us. They ran that product for about I believe 2.5 years, and it never went beyond Ratnakar Bank though. Mm-hmm. We never ended up closing another deal, and that's when I joined EasyTap and I started working on their product.